There was a moment when the numbers stopped adding up, and you realized they never would again. You were sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of you, bills, statements, receipts you'd been avoiding. The light was dim. You had a pen in your hand, clicking it without writing anything. You kept adding the same numbers over and over, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Your phone was face down beside you. You could hear the refrigerator humming. The air felt heavy. Your coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but you kept the mug there anyway. Something to hold on to when your hands needed something to do besides write numbers that didn't work. You'd gotten the paycheck, looked at the amount. It was the same as always, the exact number you expected. But this time, instead of relief, you felt something tighten in your chest. You stood there in the parking lot after work, phone in hand, staring at the direct deposit notification. The number looked smaller than it used to. You hadn't moved. Nothing had changed. But everything felt different. The concrete was hot under your feet. Someone's car alarm went off in the distance. You just stood there, staring at a number you'd been happy to see 6 months ago. You started writing down what you owed: rent, utilities, phone, internet, car, insurance, groceries. Each line made your hand feel heavier. The pen dragged across the paper. You could smell coffee from earlier, gone cold in the mug beside you. You kept writing. Student loans, credit card minimum, gas. The list kept going. Your paycheck was already gone before you'd written half of it down. The paper started to look like evidence. Proof that something was fundamentally broken in the equation of your life. You did the math 3 different ways. Subtracted each expense one at a time. Tried grouping them. Tried rearranging the order, like somehow that would make more money appear. You even grabbed a calculator, as if your mental math had been wrong this whole time. The calculator said the same thing. You were short, not by a little, by enough that you couldn't pretend it was fine, by enough that you'd have to make actual decisions about what didn't get paid this month. You sat back in your chair and stared at nothing. The paper sat there, full of numbers that didn't work. You felt tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Your jaw was clenched. You hadn't noticed when that started. The room was quiet except for that refrigerator hum, constant, indifferent to the fact that you couldn't afford to fill it properly this month. Your back hurt from sitting hunched over. Your eyes hurt from staring at numbers. Everything hurt in small, manageable ways that added up to something unmanageable. You learned this early. You started thinking about what you could cut. Not luxuries, those were already gone. You were thinking about necessities. Could you eat cheaper, drive less, cancel something you actually needed? You sat there ranking your expenses by which ones would hurt least to lose. The heat could go lower. You'd wear more layers. The phone plan could maybe go down a tier. You'd use Wi-Fi more. Each cut felt like a small defeat. Each compromise felt like losing a piece of the life you thought you'd have by now. You remembered when this salary felt like enough. When you'd first gotten the job, first seen that number, and thought, okay, I can work with this. That was before rent went up. Before gas prices changed. Before groceries cost what they cost now. The salary stayed the same. Everything else didn't. And somehow you were the one who had to make it work. You'd been so proud when you got the offer letter. You'd called people, celebrated, felt like you'd made it. Now that same number felt like a prison. You looked at other job listings on your phone, scrolled through pages of positions that paid about the same, sometimes less. Saw words like competitive salary attached to numbers that would put you in the exact same situation, just with a different company name at the top of the pay stub. You closed the app. Opened it again 5 minutes later. Closed it again. You knew most of them by heart now. You'd been checking for months. The options were depressingly consistent. You started doing math everywhere. In the shower, calculating water costs. At the grocery store, adding before you got to the register. In your car, watching the gas gauge, converting miles to dollars. Your brain wouldn't stop. Every action became arithmetic. Every choice became a calculation. You couldn't remember the last time you'd bought something without thinking about what else that money could have covered. Everything was either a dollar amount or a decision you couldn't afford to make wrong. You had a moment where you realized you were tired of being good at surviving on less, tired of being resourceful, tired of making it work. It felt like a skill you'd never asked to develop, an expertise you'd been forced to acquire, and the reward for getting better at it was just more of the same. You sat there, and the unfairness of it settled into your bones. People praised you for being responsible, for making it work, for being smart with money. But you didn't want to be smart with money. You wanted to have enough money that being smart about it was optional. You didn't need it explained. You stopped talking about money with certain people, the ones who'd say, just find a better job, like jobs grew on trees with your specific qualifications attached. The ones who'd suggest budgeting apps like you weren't already tracking every dollar. The ones who'd offer advice that only worked if you had a buffer, a safety net, parents you could call, savings you could dip into. You just nodded and changed the subject. Their advice came from a place you couldn't access, a world where the math was different, where there was wiggle room, where one mistake didn't cascade into 3 more problems. You felt it in your body, not just stress, something deeper, a tiredness that lived in your shoulders, your jaw, the back of your neck. You'd wake up already exhausted, not from bad sleep, from the weight of knowing that today's paycheck was already allocated to yesterday's bills, that you were always behind, always catching up, never actually getting ahead. Your body kept score even when your mind tried to ignore it. You started noticing who didn't worry about money. Not rich people, you'd always known about them, but regular people who just didn't think about it the way you did. Who bought lunch without calculating? Who fixed their car immediately instead of researching how long they could drive it broken? Who didn't know the price of everything in their cart? The gap between you and them felt wider than it used to. You'd thought you were all in the same boat. Turned out there were different boats. Yours just had more holes in it. You had the conversation with yourself about asking for a raise, practiced it in your head, prepared reasons, justifications, evidence of your value. Then you remembered the last budget meeting, the company email about tightening belts, your manager's face when someone else had asked. You didn't bring it up, you just kept working, kept hoping something would change, kept knowing it probably wouldn't. The conversation lived in your head, fully formed, never spoken. You ran through it during your commute, in the shower, late at night, but never out loud. You realized you were making decisions your parents made, ones you'd judged when you were younger. Now you understood. Now you were standing in the same grocery aisle, holding the cheaper version of something, doing the same math, making the same choices. The cycle was so clear you could see its shape, and you were standing inside it. You'd promised yourself you'd do better, be smarter, make more money, break the pattern. But here you were, repeating it, because the pattern wasn't about choices. It was about math that didn't work for people like you. You already knew what came next. You looked at your friends' lives on social media, trips, dinners out, new things. You didn't feel jealous exactly, more like confused. How were they doing it? Same degree, similar jobs, similar starting points. But somehow they had space in their budgets for lives that looked fuller than yours. You wondered what you were missing, what mistake you'd made that put you on this side of the gap. Then you'd remember parents who helped with the down payment, a partner who split costs, an inheritance, a side gig that actually paid, student loans their family covered, small advantages that compounded into big differences. You had moments where you felt angry, not loud, not explosive, just a quiet, constant anger that sat in your chest, at the system that made this normal, at the jobs that demanded degrees but paid like they didn't, at the rent that climbed while wages stayed frozen, at having to choose between things you needed, at being told to work harder when you were already working as hard as you could. The anger had nowhere to go, so it just lived there, burning slow and steady, fueling nothing, changing nothing. You started to understand your parents' faces in new ways, the stress you'd seen but not comprehended, the times they'd said no, the choices they'd made. You'd thought you'd do better, be smarter, make different decisions. But here you were, making the same ones, for the same reasons, with the same paycheck that wasn't enough. You wanted to call them and apologize for every time you'd asked for something they couldn't afford, for every time you'd made them explain why the answer was no. You caught yourself doing the math while someone was talking to you. They were telling a story and you were calculating how much that dinner they mentioned cost, how that fit into their budget, whether they were struggling too or if it was just you. You weren't listening anymore. You were just counting, always counting. Your brain had become a calculator that wouldn't shut off. Every conversation was a word problem. Every story was a budget analysis. You couldn't remember how to just listen without computing. You had this fantasy sometimes, not about being rich, just about the numbers working, about your paycheck covering your bills with enough left over that you could breathe, that you could save, that an unexpected expense wouldn't trigger a crisis, that you could make plans without immediately calculating if you could afford them. It wasn't an extravagant dream. That was the saddest part. You weren't dreaming of yachts or mansions, just dreaming of not having to do math before saying yes to coffee with a friend. This wasn't the last time. You started seeing expiration dates differently. That milk that was good for 3 more days became a decision point. Buy new now while you had money, or risk running out before payday? Everything was timing. Everything was strategy. You became an expert in the choreography of staying afloat, and you hated how good you'd gotten at it. You knew exactly how long you could stretch things, how many meals you could make from what, how to time purchases to maximize every dollar. It was a skill set you'd never wanted to master. You realized that treating yourself had become buying regular things without guilt. Not luxuries, just normal things. A name brand item instead of generic. Ordering the meal you actually wanted instead of the cheapest one. Not having to justify every small purchase to yourself. That counted as a treat now. You weren't sure when that shift happened. When your baseline expectations dropped so low that normal became luxury. You stopped planning for the future in big ways. Retirement felt like a joke. Buying a house felt like a fairy tale. You were just trying to make it through this month, then next month. The future was a luxury for people whose present was stable. Yours wasn't. So you lived in 2-week increments, paycheck to paycheck, and tried not to think beyond that. Every financial advisor article about saving for retirement felt like it was written in a different language, for people living in a different economy, on a different planet. You had moments of wondering if you'd done something wrong, if everyone else had figured out some secret you'd missed, if you were just bad at this, at adulting, at money, at life. Then you'd talk to someone else and realize they were doing the same math, making the same choices, feeling the same squeeze. And you'd feel less alone, but also more trapped. Because if everyone was struggling, who was going to fix it? If this was normal, what hope was there of it ever getting better? You started noticing how much of your mental energy went to money, not just the calculating, the worrying, the planning, the contingency planning, the what-if scenarios. The portion of your brain that was always running financial simulations in the background, trying to predict and prevent disaster. You wondered what you could do with that energy if you didn't need it for survival, what you could create, what you could think about, who you could be if your brain wasn't always occupied with making the math work. If you stayed this long, you know this feeling. The moment you realized your salary wasn't enough, that working hard wasn't enough, that doing everything right wasn't enough, that the system was built this way, and you were just living inside it, trying to make it work with tools that were never meant to be sufficient. It doesn't end. You don't solve it. You just wake up tomorrow and do the math again, and again, and again, and somewhere in all that counting, you keep going, because what else is there to do? Because rent is due. Because you have to eat. Because stopping isn't an option. So you sit at that table, you run the numbers, you make the cuts, you survive another month. And the whole time, you're exhausted from pretending this is fine, from acting like this is how it's supposed to work, From carrying the weight of a system that demands everything and gives back just enough to keep you standing, barely.